You're literally waiting to die.
It doesn't bother me. It's something I accepted a long time ago.
What happens when the darkest corners of humanity are exposed? What if I told you that some of the most chilling prison stories, filled with cruelty and unimaginable horror, still echo through history? These aren't just tales, they're real accounts of human suffering that have shaped the brutal history of incarceration. Today, we're diving into 5 prison stories so dark and twisted, they'll make you question everything about the justice system. The truth is often more terrifying than fiction. Let's get started. 1. Cell Block D, The Haunting of Alcatraz. Alcatraz is notorious for being one of the most secure and infamous prisons in U.S. history. Among its many dark corners, Cell Block D stands out. It was known as the Hole, where prisoners endured the cruelest treatment. Located in the coldest section of the prison, this block housed solitary confinement cells designed for punishment. Prisoners who were sent here weren't just confined, they were left to suffer mentally and physically in isolation, sometimes for years. The air was thick with the echoes of desperate screams, yet there was one particular cell that was rumored to be haunted. This was no ordinary solitary confinement room. It was an area where time seemed to stand still, and many who entered were never the same. In the 1940s, an inmate was placed in this infamous pitch-black cell. As soon as the door slammed shut, he began screaming for help, but the guards, unfazed by his cries, let him suffer in silence. The next morning, the guards found him dead, with a look of pure terror frozen on his face. No one could explain how he died, but an autopsy revealed strangulation, yet there was no sign of foul play. To this day, many who entered this cell, whether guards or prisoners, have recounted an overwhelming sense of dread, claiming they felt something more than just the physical coldness of the cell. Something that made them wish they'd never stepped foot inside. The eerie silence of this room continues to haunt the memories of those who dared to enter, giving rise to the belief that there might be something far more sinister at work in the shadows of Cell Block D. 2. The Nurse's Story, A Terrifying Encounter. Imagine being a nurse in a maximum security prison, knowing you might have to deal with violent, unpredictable inmates every day. One Reddit post shared by a former prison nurse detailed one of the most terrifying moments of their career. The inmate, a man known for his violent outbursts, was being restrained in a special chair designed to control aggressive behavior. It was meant to hold inmates still, but the constant restraint came with its own set of horrors. Every 15 minutes, the nurse had to check the inmate's pulses to ensure that the handcuffs weren't cutting off circulation. It was a high-stakes, high-pressure environment, and things could go wrong in a heartbeat. But things took a turn when the inmate's time came to be released from the chair for his break. As soon as his cuffs were unlocked, he went into a violent frenzy, attacking the guards and nurses with terrifying force. He bit several guards, headbutted them, and even punched them in the face before the guards could get him back under control. The nurse, in a panic, had to flee for safety, terrified for her life. After the incident, the inmate was restrained again, and all 5 guards were sent to the hospital for injuries. The nurse's story serves as a chilling reminder of just how dangerous life inside a prison can be, not only for the inmates but for those who are tasked with caring for them. These intense moments, coupled with the constant fear of unpredictable violence, have left the nurse with scars that are invisible but no less profound. 3. Rikers Island, a corrupt prison system exposed. Rikers Island is infamous for its corruption and brutal treatment of inmates. In 2008, a shocking story came to light, exposing just how deep the problems ran within the system. 3 inmates were charged with the murder of fellow prisoner Christopher Robinson, but what made this case particularly chilling wasn't just the murder itself, it was the fact that the Fight Club, in which Robinson was forced to participate, was run by the guards. These weren't just random inmate fights, they were carefully orchestrated by the correctional officers, who would allow certain inmates to violently attack others for sport. Robinson, who refused to join the Fight Club, was beaten to death as a result. What's even more disturbing is that the guards were not just turning a blind eye, they were actively encouraging and supervising the violence. They had created a system of organized violence within the prison walls, where innocent inmates were brutally punished for refusing to participate. Robinson's tragic death sparked an investigation that uncovered a massive, organized scheme that involved corrupt guards and enforcers. This wasn't just about controlling inmates, it was about creating fear, chaos, and suffering for entertainment. The public's shock at the sheer cruelty of the situation was palpable, but what was even more shocking was how deep the corruption ran within Rikers Island, affecting not only the inmates but the guards who participated in the violence. What was once an isolated case of brutality turned into a broader systemic issue, prompting calls for much-needed reforms in the prison system. 4. Pitești Prison, a psychological nightmare. Pitești Prison in Romania is infamous for its so-called re-education experiments, which were held between 1949 and 1951. These experiments were not just about breaking a person physically, but psychologically, brainwashing prisoners into betraying their beliefs, religion, and personal identities. The aim was to strip them of their will and force them into complete obedience to the communist regime. Prisoners were subjected to extreme physical and psychological abuse, all with the intention of re-educating them. The prisoners at Pitești were forced to endure horrific conditions. They were beaten, humiliated, and tortured until they confessed to crimes they hadn't committed. But the worst part of these experiments was the psychological torment. Prisoners were manipulated into betraying their fellow inmates, often turning them against each other, forcing them to give up their deepest beliefs. The torture was so extreme that it has been described as an attempt to break their very souls. One particularly cruel tactic involved forcing prisoners to wear religious symbols and then renouncing them in public as part of their forced confessions. These re-education methods resulted in the deaths of hundreds of prisoners and left countless others mentally broken. Pitești Prison remains a stark reminder of the lengths to which totalitarian regimes will go to suppress dissent, using fear and torture as tools of control. The twisted legacy of these experiments continues to haunt Romania to this day, as survivors struggle with the long-lasting psychological scars. 5. ADX Florence, a nightmare of isolation. ADX Florence, located in Colorado, is known as one of the most secure prisons in the world. It's home to some of the most dangerous criminals in the U.S., but the real horror of ADX Florence isn't just in the crimes committed by the inmates, it's in the conditions they endure. One particularly disturbing story comes from Harold Cunningham, a man who was transferred to ADX Florence in 2001. Cunningham, who suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, was denied his medication upon arrival at the prison, leading to a rapid deterioration of his mental health. What followed was a series of brutal punishments and prolonged periods of isolation. Cunningham was stripped of his clothes for weeks at a time, chained to his bed, and given minimal food, often stale bread and rotten apples. His time at ADX Florence was marked by constant physical and mental abuse, which he described as being treated like an animal. The mental toll of his isolation was so extreme that Cunningham later developed severe PTSD. His case highlights the horrifying effects of solitary confinement, especially for those with mental health conditions. Cunningham's story is just one example of how ADX Florence's extreme isolation practices can break a person, both physically and mentally, turning them into mere shells of their former selves. The fact that he was denied necessary medical treatment and left in solitary confinement for so long speaks to the dangers of unchecked authority and the dire consequences of dehumanizing prisoners. These 5 prison stories are not just dark, they're a reflection of the inhumanity that can exist behind bars. From brutal torture techniques to corrupt prison systems, these tales show just how far some have gone in the name of control and punishment. What makes them even more disturbing is the fact that many of these practices continue to shape the way we view justice and incarceration today. If these stories left you questioning the systems that are supposed to protect, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more stories that uncover the darker side of history.